Mr. Stevenson was a leading criminal lawyer. He wore 2 gold earrings in his left ear and was well known for representing clients involved in unusual cases.
This story has all the salacious details that newspaper editors just love. A prominent gay criminal lawyer, Darren Stevenson, shot in the back of the head.
The partially clothed body was frozen solid in a crouched position when police prized open the freezer about 5 o'clock last night. Detectives have been questioning a young man who was found in possession of the car.
That young man was David Zack, Darren Stevenson's young lover. The jury finds him guilty of murder and he serves 14 years in prison. Do you think that David Zack pulled the trigger?
Yes, I do.
Do you think he put the body in the freezer?
Yes, I do.
But there's one problem. For 40 years, David has insisted he didn't do it.
I did not kill Darren Stevenson. I played no part whatsoever in his murder.
Now he wants my help to clear his name, and it will lead me into a terrifying world of abductions, killings and cover-ups that go to the highest echelons of South Australia.
I always look at it from the point of view that the evidence given was just too perfect.
As my investigation continues, I still have so many questions about this case, like how does a high school dropout end up with a high-flying legal in the first place?
Yeah, he just approached me on the basis that I'd be really good to photograph as a model and if I'd be interested.
What did 3 crucial witnesses see at the house on the night of the murder? What was in the garbage bag?
Nobody knows.
What was in the attaché case?
Nobody knows.
How did South Australia's chief forensic pathologist bungle key evidence, which may well prove David's innocence?
If I were asked about the reliability of the formula, I would have said, in my opinion, it's bullshit.
And my own hunt to track down a killer. He told me to back off and that I'd end up wearing cement boots. Look at it from the jury's point of view just for a second. It's really not hard to see why they convicted David. He's at the murder house both before and after the murder. His fingerprints are all over that freezer. He's got gunpowder residue on his hands, and then he takes Darren's prized sports car, as if you would, and drives through to Cooper Pedy in the middle of the night.
Totally wrong sort of car to be driving in that part of the world in those days.
Or is it because the word on the street about Darren's is true and that he was involved in some really dark and murky stuff, and whatever that was, that led to his murder? And David was the fall guy.
Did you shoot Darren Stevenson? No.
Mick Standing arrests David Zack for stealing Darren's car. But when the lawyer's body turns up in the freezer with a bullet to the back of the head, that charge changes to murder.
And when I got there, the pathologist was already there, and Darren's was on the bed.
Why was he on the bed?
They could have well have been getting him into the position that they thought he was in when he was killed.
Jess, determining time of death is critically important in any murder investigation. This case isn't any different to that. But that's almost impossible when the body is virtually frozen solid.
Pathologists had to wait until the body thawed before they could perform the post-mortem. What was the time of death? Any idea?
No, we don't know yet.
Calculating that time fell to the state's chief forensic pathologist, Dr. Colin Manock.
The human brain is like blancmange. It's very soft, and it's impossible to carve.
Tell me about Manock.
Manock gave evidence that Darren had been murdered between 4:45 to 8:45 p.m. And the period of time between when Darren had been physically moved from bed to the freezer being 1 hour at the most.
This is where serious questions need to be asked, because since David's trial in 1979, the accuracy of Dr. Manock's work has been reviewed by his peers, and what they say is alarming. Dr. Collins, is it possible to accurately determine time of death in a frozen body?
No, quite simply, no.
The problem is Dr. Manock calculated the time of death using an experimental formula to determine how long a body takes to cool. But it doesn't apply to a body that's frozen solid.
If I were asked about the reliability of the formula, I would have said, in my opinion, it's bullshit.
It's just astonishing. It's astonishing that the South Australian former chief forensic pathologist could, if the word you use, bullshit, to a jury. Do you believe that the conviction is now in doubt?
I certainly do. There is absolutely no doubt about that.
In a submission to the Parliament of South Australia, a consultant pathologist reviewing the case said that it was transparently obvious that the experimental conditions were not applicable to the circumstances of Darren Stevenson's death.
What Dr. Manock did there was quite shocking.
That's a really strong word, shocking, from one scientist talking about another one. How did he come to that time of death?
Well, by misusing science. He chose to make an adjustment of 40% because that's what he thought sounded reasonable. And you're thinking, now wait a minute, you know, this is not science at all. This is actually an abuse of science.
The effect of this mathematical bungle is that it throws open the time Darren was killed and his body placed into the freezer. It could have been any time from 6 p.m, after the phone call with Gino Gambardella, to the early hours of the following day, when David says he was driving to Coober Pedy. Now it's my turn to use the word shocking. Why would he do that?
Well, he apparently just felt a compulsion to actually produce a result.
You also have to wonder how many other cases Dr. Manock may have fumbled. Because for David, the botched forensic evidence is the basis for his forthcoming appeal.
How quickly can we actually put it through the court?
Appeals are dealt with very quickly now. There was a time they were not, but right now, you know, with a period of months, you can have it dealt with.
Do you say that David is innocent? Or do you say that because he has had a flawed trial, that therefore he should be, in the eyes of the public, seen to be innocent?
Whether I think he's innocent or not is completely irrelevant to what I'm doing. If the trial's flawed, you don't deserve to be convicted, and you are therefore technically innocent.
How confident are you?
The law's a very tricky master. I could be overconfident, but look, I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think there were prospects of success, reasonable prospects.
I've been searching for anybody who knew David when he was younger, and I've scored another lucky break. As a teenager, Mark Smith was one of David's best mates, and David even lived with his family for a while. I can't tell you how thrilled I was to find you the other day. I've been looking for you for a long time.
Makes me feel very special.
Really appreciate you coming in today because I know it wasn't an easy decision to make. Mark, I want to take you back to the 70s when you first met David Zack.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about that. How did you meet him?
I met David at school, high school. He was a year above me from memory.
How close were you? Were you really best mates? Or?
It got to the stage, because he only lived around the corner from us, he wasn't comfortable at home, so he ended up living with us for a little while.
You say he wasn't comfortable at home, Mark. What does that mean?
Well, for him to leave home when he was 16 years old sort of told me that he wasn't happy at home. Our family is a very welcoming sort of family. And my father said, well, if he wants to go somewhere, he can move in here.
Did David have dreams, ambitions that you remember? What did he want to do with his life?
He wanted to be as good as everybody else, and he didn't think he was. The company that I now own, he worked as an apprentice for a little while, but he just walked away.
He strikes me as a man who hasn't fulfilled hardly any dreams or ambitions at all.
Hasn't had much of a chance, has he? You know, his life was interrupted terribly before he's 20 years old.
Mark's father was divorced and he hired help to look after the kids. But there was a problem.
The housekeeper said after some time, "You employed me to mind 2 children, not 3. So he came to me and he said, "Look," he said, "I'm in a bit of a bind here." He said, I have to keep the housekeeper. David's very, very upset. And that is when he went into the town. And as far as I know, that's where it all started. But bear in mind, David was not quite 16 when that happened.
So, unable to continue living with the Smiths, David wanders into the city. And who does he say approaches him? Darren's friend, the Italian chiropractor, Gino Gambardella. In 1976, I was 16.
Yeah, well, you were the same age as me.
Same age as you.
There you go. I just happened to come into Adelaide that day with my brother, and Gambardella just happened to pull up. Yeah, he just approached me on the basis that I'd be really good to photograph as a model and if I'd be interested. So, I think I made a time to meet him later that evening.
Did it strike you as a little bit odd that someone was coming up to you randomly and saying, you know, would you like me to take your photos and be a model?
Seems to be a common enough ploy that people use.
Tell me about the first meeting. You go...
I went with Gambardella, and Gambardella had a young friend with him, by the name of Joe. He was just somebody that happened to be there. I just got in the car without even really giving it a second thought. And he said about, calling into his friends. He lives in a funny white house. And it all began from there.
You've got Gino in the car, you've got Joe in the car, and you meet Darren Stevenson.
Yes.
How did you meet him? What was the first thing he did or said?
I don't know, he just made us feel welcome, I guess.
How quickly did the 4 of you end up in the bedroom?
Oh, geez, within a matter of hours. As I said, I have a thought that the reason Joe was there was to add normality. Perhaps because he's there, he's young, I'm young.
There's something not right about this. It's not right at all. David, who was underage, says he was plucked off the street by this Gino Gambardella character, delivered to Darren Stevenson's door, and there was another young man there called Joe, and then they all promptly fell into bed together. I've got to find Joe. Who is he? And Gino Gambardella, his name just repeatedly comes up. And what on earth was he doing anyway? Married, middle-aged, kids, wandering around the streets of Adelaide, taking photos of underage boys. David and I do share something in common, yeah. We both had partners who were murdered. Ron was a fisherman, so one of the first things I did was came down to here, down on the docks, to the fishing boats, asking around to see if any of his mates knew where he was. Some of them said, oh, they thought he'd gone fishing, but nobody really knew. I left a note for him. Ron, I don't care what you've been up to, but I'm really very concerned you're okay. Could you please call me as soon as you get in? Love, Dee. You look at the look on his face.
Yeah.
He looks like a bushranger. Right from the beginning, I suspected that a guy called Stephen, who had owed Ron $8,000, and he was the last person that Ron was to see the day he disappeared, was involved somehow in his disappearance. I rang every pub pretty much on the east coast of Tasmania because he lived up there, and I couldn't remember what his last name was. I knew if I heard it, I'd know it. So I rang every pub looking for Stephen. Is Stephen in the bar? Stephen Brown, Stephen Smith was there, but the barmaids just laughed at me. I finally hit pay dirt. Oh, Stephen Smith's here, Stephen Brown, Stephen Standage. I said, that's him. That's him. We met in this pub, right here. He told me to back off and that I'd end up wearing cement boots. I just kept telling the police, you need to look at Stephen Standage. You need to look at Stephen Standage. And every time he'd threaten me or I'd get phone calls in the middle of the night, can you imagine the fear? It was 2 o'clock in the morning, pitch black. Got my daughter in the next room. I'm on my own. Phone rings, no one there, heavy breathing. This wasn't a sex call. This was a, you back off. You have been warned. Adelaide is a really beautiful city, you know, the River Torrens that snakes right through the middle and the parklands around it and all the plays and the music and the theatre. But the city of churches is also known colloquially as the city of corpses.
Throughout today, the search has continued for the missing Beaumont children.
In 1976 and 1977, 7 women were raped and killed. The remains found more than a year later, dumped near Truro, north of Adelaide.
8 bodies found inside acid-filled barrels in a bank vault in South Australia's mid-north.
After having been sexually abused and murdered, he'd been washed and redressed, a bizarre touch which police would see repeated in later murders blamed on the family.
And South Australia seems to have more of these types of killings than any other state.
Back then, Adelaide was no place to be a homeless young man. Every kid knew about stranger danger, even in the 70s. So I wonder what Margaret knew about what David was up to.
Don't ask me why I remember it was 8 o'clock, but it was 8 o'clock. And I rang and this very, very well-spoken voice answered. And I identified myself and I said that I was David's mother and I understood that David was living there and I just wondered if I could have a word with him. Oh, well, David's not here. He said the little bugger, he probably spent the night at his girlfriend's house.
David, your mum contacted Darren, didn't she, looking for you?
I think he said something to the effect that I was out with a girl.
Were you out with a girl?
No, I was lying there next to him.
It's fairly duplicitous of him, isn't it?
Well, you know, I don't know what else he could have possibly said.
For me, that was it. That was as fine as anything. David's happy.
So according to David, he and Darren were madly in love and they lived together on and off for about 3 years. But it seems that Darren had other ideas. You weren't even of a legal age when you both met.
No, I was a year under. I think the legal age was 17. I didn't really give it a lot of thought because Darren said not to really speak about it, but that was, I think he was more conscious of the fact of my age.
There's something quite awful about that an older man, a high-profile criminal lawyer, is telling his young lover, who's not of age, don't talk about this. You know, the old thing, if your relationship has to be a secret, you shouldn't be in it.
Well, if it doesn't feel right, then it's not right. Yeah, I understand the concept. But no, I think it was just the engagement and I guess the excitement and just having that interest taken in me.
As your relationship progressed with Darren, did it become monogamous?
Certainly, I didn't have homosexual relationships with other men. Darren certainly did, and I was aware of that.
Those relationships included what Darren's called his Friday night soirees, gay sex parties where underage boys were delivered to the door by Gino Gambardella. David, why were you excluded from those Friday night soirees at Darren's house?
I think Darren's obviously thought of me as being someone he didn't want to have shared with other people. Perhaps, I would like to think that he always watched out for me for that reason.
First night you met Gambardella, you go to bed with him. After that, your relationship with him changes.
Because of his habit of bringing young people over, abusing them, and then not having any real further contact.
It's an interesting word you just used, abusing them.
Mm-hmm. I'll use the word abuse because I later learned that Gambardella had a long history of such conduct.
If Gambardella abused boys, then it must follow surely that Darren's did as well.
Oh, most definitely. I can't separate one from the other.
Think about it. David didn't stand a chance. Effectively homeless, he falls into the loving arms, not of social services or a church group, but a predatory group of pedophiles. What the hell was Darren Stevenson doing? Small town like Adelaide, a high-profile criminal lawyer. He's got underage boys, he's got Friday night soirees. He's not the upstanding citizen that these other lawyers would make him out to be. He was really playing against the rules and really pushing his luck.
I think it was pretty well known Darren was homosexual and had some pretty rough mates. For example, he was a part of the initiation ceremony for the Barbarian motorcycle gang.
So you're talking about sexual initiations?
Well, that was the way I took it.
So how would that play out?
Well, your guess is as good as mine on that. I don't think it takes much imagination to think what it would be, particularly as Darren was a homosexual.
I wonder just how far this rough play went, because now we're talking about violent outlaws from a motorcycle gang. I mean, they're hardly choir boys. Is it possible then this is what led to Darren's murder? This is something of an indelicate question, but I've often wondered whether or not Darren Stevenson was in the act of having sex when he was murdered.
He could have been lying down, he could have been standing up, he could have been sitting up, just having regard to the location and passage of the bullet through the brain. I can't be more definite than that. I suppose all I could say is that he certainly wasn't lying on his back.
Would you be able to show me where the gunshot went into the skull and where it stopped?
Yes, I can. The entry wound was at the back of the skull, just to the right of the midline. It passed basically horizontally, didn't exit the skull, but ended up outside the brain, just above the right eye socket. So in other words, a horizontal track.
Was that the shot of an amateur or a professional?
It may have been a lucky shot by an amateur. It's also equally consistent, if not more consistent, with being a shot by a professional.
An execution?
Yes, an execution.
If you want to target somebody for Darren Stevenson's murder, and you've taken all the bits and pieces out and eliminated that, and the other, what are you left with in the middle? A bunch of bikies?
Or a guy who procures young men for him?
And why kill him and put him in the freezer?
Stop the smell, stop detection.
And seal the freezer down, so it won't be found.
Execution
What about
style?
taking all his clothes off?
Sex?
sex beforehand, well, now you've got somebody with a different motive.
With so many people in the frame and now what appears to be a professional hit, I'm going to need some help. When police struggle to solve a case, they sometimes turn to criminal profilers. Chris Illingsworth is world class. As a 25-year detective, she worked the Backpacker murders case, amongst others, and later trained at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, made famous by the movie Silence of the Lambs. She has an amazing brain that can see around corners. Hello.
Hi.
Lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you. How are you?
Terrific, thank you. I need your help.
Okay, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
This is a gorgeous spot.
Yeah, thank you.
Give me a potted history of your time in New South Wales Police.
Well, I was a detective sergeant in the New South Wales Police Force for 25 years, and in that time I served as an investigator, intelligence analyst and a behavioural analyst, which is also known as a criminal profiler. And as a criminal profiler, I study and interpret the behaviour of victims and offenders at crime scenes, and from that reconstruct the crime and develop an offender profile for use by the investigators.
You've got a fantastic reputation. What's your process?
Well, I need case materials to work with, and the case materials involve the victimology, what we know about the victim, the crime scene, everything about the crime scene, where it's located, all the physical evidence from the crime, all the behaviour that's evident in the crime, and the injuries to the victim. How did this victim die? What was the cause of death and the manner of death?
You must have a strong gut.
Well, I've looked at a lot of crime scenes and crime scene material. It's always interesting. I look at it from the point of view of what information is available and what information is missing. I've got a process that I go through. I basically go around the outer edges of the photo and work my way in towards the centre of the photo. And that way I don't miss anything, because there are little nuances that, might be something on a table in the background or something on the floor that's not really noticeable at first. And it's those little things, those little details that can inform the story of what's happened at the crime.
Chris, I'm not sure that David Zack's telling me the truth.
There are inconsistencies in his story, definitely.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall inside Darren Stevenson's house. And we've had an architect draw up these plans in 3D. The stories that went on in there have now become urban legend, not just the murder, but all the other things that were going on at the time. It's really important that I talk to someone who bought that house after the murder. I've managed to track down one of the subsequent owners. It's an amazing get because she knew Darren and David when they were together. Family lawyer Diane Myers still uses the outline of the murder house as her logo.
I think you called the roof construction a hyperbolic paraboloid, so it couldn't have been a more way out place if you tried, and it cost a fortune to build.
What was he like, Darren?
Oh, he was very animated, quite generous, liked to be the life of the party, and he thought he was psychic.
Tell me about David Zack.
Look, he was young and silly, I thought, quite a frivolous fellow for a man like Darren to be involved with. Darren was a barrister.
Do you think Darren was in love with David?
Goodness, I wouldn't know.
Do you think David was in love with Darren?
I think David was in love with David.
So you bought that property. What did you find in that house?
Oh, before we moved in, it had to be cleaned and painted. It was very scruffy inside, filthy. My daughter and I went down to the building to check on progress. I don't know why, but I picked up a claw hammer and opened the double doors storage cupboard and I prized open the wooden floor of that cupboard. And there was a big hole in the ground underneath it.
Why would Darren have needed to have a hidey hole like that in a cupboard?
I have no idea. We found a paper bag with a piece of tubing and what looked like a Bunsen burner sort of cylinder, and a prescription packet with some ampules in it that had been partially used.
What was it?
Some sort of a testosterone product.
What was Darren's doing with testosterone?
I don't know. What does any man do with testosterone?
I don't know, my memory's not that long. You know the rumour and scuttlebutt about what was going on in Darren's life?
Yes.
What do you think?
I understood that he was a gay man and that he entertained other gay people there. I didn't know much more about it than that.
Whatever the rumours and the real nature of Darren's entertaining, according to David, things took a dark turn on the Saturday night before the murder, after they'd been to a nightclub called La Belle. What sort of place was it?
Strip club?
What blokes?
No, female strippers.
Did he look to you like a man who was worried that in a day or so something terrible may happen to him?
No, he certainly didn't seem distracted or preoccupied with other thoughts.
So you went back to Greenhill Road after La Belle. What happened then?
And then he got a phone call.
The phone's ringing at what time in the morning?
I would say about 1 o'clock.
Did that strike you as odd, that the phone was ringing at 1 o'clock in the morning?
At that time in the morning, certainly.
How much did you hear of the call?
Not a great deal. He just came back saying something about he wants to get out, and I'm thinking, geez.
Get out of what?
I don't know. You know, it was just something, you know.
Was he troubled?
Oh, he was, you know, he'd certainly been upset about whatever it was.
Did you have to comfort Darren when he got off the phone?
Oh, indeed, because, you know, because that's the very point I'm trying to make, was that there was something obviously going on in the background which unsettled him.
Has it occurred to you that he meant he wanted to get out of the relationship with you?
No, because he would have said, yeah, I didn't think there was anything wrong or sort of we were on the rocks.
I think one of their motives, wasn't it, was that Darren had tired of you. It was time to bring in a new boy.
There was no suggestion of that. There was no evidence of that, and certainly Darren hadn't suggested that to me.
I mean, what was it exactly that Darren wanted to get out of? Was it the underage sex parties, the bikies, the boys? Or is it possible that that conversation just didn't happen at all? And that David just made it up? A clue may lie in Darren's finances and other records, which Chris has now had a chance to comb through. And what they reveal is unsettling.
So he had some financial stresses. He just paid out a large amount of money to the ATO, about $12,000. His bank accounts were overdrawn, and he'd also raided his client's trust account as well to pay for various things like the tax bills.
But that's fraudulent.
It is a fraudulent offence, yeah. And he just had an Opal deal gone bad in London, where Darren's lost out on about $25,000.
Financially, it sounds like it was a bit of a disaster for him. What else was going on?
So he had work pressures as well. He was being overrun really by clientele. He had a lot of clients coming to his house in the evenings and phone calls in the evenings, to the point where they were coming on the Saturdays as well. There were criminals, drug dealers, bikies, opal dealers.
What about his lifestyle?
Yeah, lifestyle, he had a bit going on there. He was a bisexual man who would go out to a nightclub. That whole lifestyle nightclub thing was in his life. And there are reports that he was using drugs and alcohol. But he was also into firearms. Of course, he had 2 firearms on his wall in his bedroom.
One of which killed him. And he also had the number plate.
Yeah, his number plate was GUN 045, so like a 45 caliber gun. And there's also reports of the Friday night sex parties at his house.
What was he doing, having sex parties?
He was engaging in homosexual rape offences on a consensual basis. Every time he had sex with a boy under the age of 17, he was committing a rape offence under the South Australian law. And Darren would have known that. He was a criminal lawyer.
Just take me through, Chris, from the beginning. Why would David Zack be a stressor in his life?
So David would have been a financial stress. So Darren's already had lots of financial stresses going on. He was fully supporting David financially. He was putting a roof over his head, he was giving him money, and David's whole lifestyle revolved around what Darren could provide for him.
So when David said that he'd overheard Darren say that he wanted to get out, I'm starting to get a picture of why. I mean, it could have been anything: financial, work pressures, lifestyle, people. His sex life alone was pretty interesting and dangerous for a man in his position.
Yeah.
High risk.
Yeah, there's a lot there that would have fed into his concerns about what he was involved with. All of these risks probably account for why Darren was so security conscious at home. Somebody said that it was Fort Knox to try to get into, and these are the reasons why.
Although David says he was only briefly at the house during the critical hours when Darren was believed to have been murdered, witnesses place him there at this time and hours afterwards. David, that night there were 3 really important witnesses who gave evidence for the Crown. One was a guy called Henry Short, who worked in the accounting offices over there.
Yes.
He'd knocked off work at 6:40 and he was waiting for his dad. He was down there, wasn't he?
Yes.
What did he say that he saw that night?
He said he saw a young person between 16 and 19, dressed in jeans and a jumper, with blonde, shoulder-length hair, come through the gateway, walk towards him slowly, then turned the corner back onto this footpath immediately.
Up into here?
Yeah, and then drive off.
Like that car is?
That car going in the distance away from us.
The Crown alleges that young man was David Zack. But according to David, it couldn't have been him, because at 6:30 that night he was driving across town to his parents' house. Now consider what the second witness saw, Rodney Shields. Rodney Shields was an accountant who worked...
Yeah, he worked with Henry Short.
Both of them were really curious about the comings and goings in this house.
Yeah, they had certainly made a comment about having a natural curiosity with the comings and goings of people.
They were sticky beaks.
Well, to put it mildly, yes.
What did he say that he saw that night?
He said at about 8:45, he noted a grey station wagon pull up alongside a car that he assumed to be Darrence's. And just after 11 p.m, he noted the same 2 vehicles in the car park.
He was a bit of a rev head, wasn't he? He knew his cars.
Yeah, apparently that's what he said, that he had a keen interest in motor vehicles.
But could he have got it wrong?
With regards to the car he assumed to have been Darrence's, most certainly, because I was en route to Cooper Pedy onwards at least at 8:30 p.m. So
you couldn't be 2 places at once?
No, not possible. Not possible.
And the station wagon?
Was identified as Gino Gambadella's.
This evidence places Gino Gambardella right at the door of the murder scene.
Deb, this is Gino's apprehension report. It's for the charge of accessory after the fact for murder.
Right.
This defendant attended at scene of murder and was present for 2 hours while body was placed in freezer. Yep. It says Mr. Shields, who worked for accountant firm at rear of Stevenson's premises, saw the car arrive, and that car was identified as Gambadella's.
Yep, yep.
And then it was still there
At 11 o'clock.
At 11 o'clock. So this all contradicts what Gino told police. So this is his record of interview with the police, and they say, when you went there, why did you park in the street instead of pulling into the driveway? And he says, because I didn't see his car, as in Darrence's car. No car, no Darrence, I just took off.
No car, no Darrence.
Yep. Well, you've got Gino's version of events and you've got Mr. Shields' version of events, and obviously the police believed Shields.
And then there's the third witness, a cabbie who picks up a fare from the house shortly after 11 o'clock. This is the first time Rodney Swalling has spoken on camera about what happened that night. In June 1979, you had a particular call out to a house in Adelaide.
Yeah, came over the radio.
What did you do when you got there?
Went up to the front door and this young man came to the door and said he wouldn't be a minute. And then he came back and put this bag in the back seat on the floor and got in the front seat with an attaché case.
Did that young man strike you in any particular way when he first opened the door?
No, just, you know, tallish, like about my height, I suppose, so not real tall. Just young and fair.
Where did you take him to? Where did he ask you to go?
The end of Rundle Mall.
So what happened when he got out of the cab?
For some reason, I knew something was funny, and I looked in the back seat and saw this big bag. And I thought, whoops, he's left his bag behind. So I whipped around the corner and yelled out, "You've left something behind." And he came across. He said, "Oh, that's the most important part." And he took the bag and walked back across the road again.
This mystery man then dumps the garbage bag in this car park bin. And despite an intensive police search, it's never found. What was in the garbage bag?
Nobody knows.
What was in the attaché case?
Nobody knows.
Do you have a look at this for me?
Yeah, that does look like him, actually.
Do you know who that man is?
Yeah, it looks like David Zack.
Would you say it was David Zack who was in your taxi?
It's possible, quite possible.
But you can't be definitive?
Not 100%. I didn't look at his face much, you know. He certainly fits the general picture.
Chris, what do you think was in the attaché case and the garbage bags?
Well, it's described as a soft pear shape, so it's soft material. There was a pillow missing so that's probably in there. David Zack's clothes were missing, never recovered, so they're probably in there. And also, there was super glue used on the freezer, so the super glue itself, the tubing, is missing from the scene.
So do you think the killer had the wherewithal to clean up the scene, or did the killer have help cleaning?
I think it's a bit of both. There's obviously 3 or more people there at the scene. If it's David Zack who did this, then David Zack has contacted someone, it seems, to come and help.
Do you think it's possible, Chris, that the person who came out of the house to get into the taxi was David Zack?
No, I don't. David Zack had to go to Coober Pedy that night. David Zack had the car. Why would he get into a cab when he's got the car? A cab leads the police trail straight back to the house. It's risky.
So Chris is convinced there are at least 3 people at the house in the hours after the murder. The drivers of the 2 cars and the mysterious young man in the taxi. And there's one more chapter to this story that takes place the following morning at the city's Legal Services Commission, which provides legal aid. At the time, Justin O'Halloran was one of the Commission's lawyers. Tell me about the young man who turned up at the Legal Services Commission. What was all that about?
One of the receptionists, Miss Anne Shea, saw somebody outside waiting. She then said, "Have you got a lawyer acting for you at present?" And he said, "Yes, Darren Stevenson, but last time I saw him, he wasn't in a fit state to act for anybody." At this stage, to make sense of the story, it turns out that Darren was in fact dead, died that night, the previous night, but his body hadn't been found, and nobody, apart from anyone who was involved in the actual incident, had any knowledge that he was dead.
Did Mr. Shea ever describe this young man?
She did describe him to the police. My recollection was that it was somebody probably around early 20s, maybe late teens, thin, blonde.
And Shea, how did she react post that meeting?
I understand that she received threatening phone calls after she reported the matter to the police. She became very agitated about that, and my understanding is she left the state because she was so concerned.
Although Justin isn't certain about this young man's identity, a lot of people believe they know who he is. It's widely believed that he's Alan Barnes, a young bloke who was murdered 2 weeks after Darren Stevenson, and his body turned up under a bridge in the Adelaide Hills.
Barnes' body was discovered an hour's drive from Adelaide under this bridge at the South Para Reservoir.
More disturbingly, Alan Barnes was the first known victim of the family, a depraved group of killers who abducted, tortured and killed young men. Could this be the nefarious world that Darren was caught up in and wanted to get out of? And where does that leave David? The whole evidence, the whole Crown case,
yes,
pivots on you being, something of a wonder man. Had to have nerves of steel, a heart of stone, you had to be a rally driver, a hitman,
yes,
you had to be a master of disguise, you had to be a genius. You also had to be able to just very cold-bloodedly shoot someone and walk away.
Most definitely.
Are you that clever?
No, no, I'm just the person I am.
What is it about this case, David? It's a mystery, isn't it?
Too many mysteries, too many people.
So many people.
Yes, so many people.
As my investigation continues, I have some big questions about David's trial. What was it about him that you didn't like? Did you find him slippery?
I prefer the word difficult.
Just what is it that David's not saying? Do you think that David Zack knows more than he's letting on?
Maybe. I actually think he's protecting someone.
Is the long-rumoured link between Darren Stevenson and the family really true? What happened to these boys is just a festering sore in this city. These people need to be exposed. And I learned the heartbreaking truth about my own partner's fate. I've always thought it was the most cowardly act to shoot a man in the back.